professional development. This could count for your professional development for the year. So the schedule will kind of be more so the professional development will include the keynote address given by Dr. Bettina Love, which will be Friday night of the Oral History Association conference. In addition to the professional development, we are encouraging our educators to attend an 8:30 to 10 o'clock session at the conference. These sessions are generally revolve around education. And so we're going to encourage educators to choose a session and attend the panel. And then our professional development will begin at 10 a.m. It will last until 2 p.m. And this professional development will focus on teaching with primary sources. So in addition to oral histories, we'll be working through how to teach using oral histories as well as archival materials. And we kind of focus this professional development around teaching hard histories, how we can use primary sources to teach hard histories. So we give you guys an overview of some of the collections from the Library of Congress. We have curriculum that we've developed and that we've developed alongside teachers throughout different regions of this country. So we have a lot of tools and resources that we've already completed and a lot of things that we're hoping to learn from educators who attend this conference. So in addition to curriculum, in addition to the collections at the Library of Congress, we're also going to have a special guest, Dr. Stevie Johnson, who is a professor at The Ohio State University. He teaches music and creative study, but he's been working with the local learning group for some years now. And so this professional development will include myself, Lisa Rachi, Guha from the Library of Congress, and Dr. Stevie Johnson. I'm not sure if anyone else from the TPS group will be there, but if so, it'll be great if they were able to join us. This is totally free outside of the fee that it will cost for you guys to attend the day session for the conference. However, if you're already slated to attend the conference and you've paid your registration fee and everything like that, the professional development will be kind of an add-on for that. And then after the PD, we are encouraging folks to attend the block party. So that's a general overview of the professional development opportunity. I kind of like to think about it being an opportunity that is a bit of an extension from this Lunch and Learn. So you guys will get some information, some resources about how to use oral history as a tool in the classroom. So this is a great kind of setup for an extension of what you'll learn today. I'll just kind of open up the floor. Are there any questions or anything so far? Okay, well, Destiny, is there anything that I'm leaving out or that you'd like me to add?
I guess just if someone is interested specifically in the professional development, again, can you tell them how to maybe get additional information or if they want to ask questions?
Yes. So at this point, I'm not sure if there's a link to sign up. I can definitely look into that and share it with the public programming committee to share out. My email address is just autumn.brown@okstate.edu. So if you guys have questions, feel free to email me. I can reach out to Lisa to see about a link to sign up at which to sign up. I don't think that that's set up yet, but I can, if you have questions, I can reach out to the appropriate people or peoples and get back to you in a timely fashion. So again, my email address is autumn.brown@okstate.edu, and I'm happy to answer any individual questions if you have them right now, if you have them a week from now, I'm happy to answer those questions for you.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate you for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so we can move into the rest of the agenda. So we'll have some introductions. There'll also be a poll. The panelists will introduce themselves and then we'll get right into the discussion. So I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Destiny Crawford. I am the chair this year for the Public Programs Committee here with OHA. I still feel that I'm fairly new in terms of the world of oral history. Most of my experience comes from my work as a independent contractor for a transcription company. So that is, again, where a lot of my experience lies. Outside of that, I do teach history at a community college here in North Carolina, um, as well as working in workforce and career development. And so at this time, I would also like to provide an opportunity for my partners and committee members to introduce themselves. So I have Matt to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I'm Matt Simmons. I'm also part of the Public Programs Committee. I'm an assistant professor of history at Emmanuel University, and also a curriculum and website coordinator for the Reanimating African American Histories of the Gulf South Oral History Project at the University of Florida, where I completed my PhD, and that's how I got involved in oral history there with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program.
Next, Tiffany, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello from Wisconsin. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Trimmer. I'm the director of the oral history program at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse on the western side of Wisconsin, and also an associate professor of history here at UWL. And we have our oral history program has an ongoing oral history project with alumni called College Life, What We Remember, which we both use as teaching materials in the first year seminar courses that I teach at UWL, but also are about to migrate the oral history project into the research and methods course that sophomores who want to be history majors teach. So I'm delighted to hear the perspective of our panelists in terms of how to teach with oral history and teach students how to do oral history. So we're very excited for you all to be here.
Thank you for that. And again, we are the Public Programs Committee. We are putting together this event. And we'll also be having a meet and greet at the annual meeting. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do or have some ideas for us, that would be a great opportunity for you to share those. Next, we'll get into a poll. We kind of want to gauge just what types of educators are present today. So if you could take a moment to answer the poll and indicate what level of education you might be in. Even if you're not currently teaching, there's an option for that as well. We kind of just want to get an idea of who all is here with us this afternoon. All right, so answers have slowed down a little. Looks like a majority of the people are actually not currently teaching at about 50%. And then the other 33% are on college level. We have a few community college people here, as well as a couple of high school and K through 8. So it is a pretty mixed crowd, which is good because our panelists also have a diverse range of experience. And so with that, we'll get into our panelist introduction. So if if each of the panelists would take a moment to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who you are.
I'll go first. I'm Andrea Lumgier. I am at the University of South Carolina. I've been an oral historian for over 25 years and have done quite a bit of teaching in the Honors College here at the college level. Sometimes I've gone into high school classrooms, but the majority of my experience is at the college level.
Thank you. Amber, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Wortham. I'm an oral historian. I'm primarily an urban planner. I've been practicing urban and transportation planning for over a decade across the United States at every level of government. And oral history has been a tool that I've used even before I knew the language for oral history, primarily within college and undergraduate classrooms, with the world and the streets and gardens being the place of learning. So I'm really excited to share some of my experience and to integrate some of that learnings and findings here today.
Thank you. Next, we will go with Mark.
Hey everyone, my name is Mark Coltrain, and I'm an oral historian at Appalachian State University, which is in the mountains of North Carolina in Boone, North Carolina. I've been in this role for about 3 years, not quite 3 years, and it's a relatively new role here at Appalachian State. As I work in our Special Collections Research Center, I don't teach credit-bearing classes at the university, but I do work with a lot of our teaching faculty, do a lot of consulting work, but also go into classrooms, primarily undergraduate classrooms, to lead sessions about oral history. And like Tiffany mentioned, I know she's not on the panel, but I worked a lot with our first year seminar program here as well with a project. So I primarily support 2 of our 4 collecting areas, our university archives, which is of course the university history, and then we have a large regional interdisciplinary collection for the that documents the history and culture of the Appalachian region. So my work primarily supports those 2 collecting areas.
All right, thank you for those introductions and sharing a little bit about what it is that you do. So at this time, we are going to move into our round table. So we are all gonna pose some questions for the 3 panelists, and each of them will, if they wish, have the opportunity to speak to those questions. And again, at the end, there will be space for questions from the audience, but we do have some that we'll work through here first before we open up the floor. So I'll start with the first question, which is just, how did you get your start in oral history, and what classes or individuals or life experiences introduced you to this specific discipline? And either of you can feel free to go first if you have your answer for that.
Happy to start. So my beginning with oral history, like I mentioned earlier, it began before I had language for the practice of oral history. For myself, I am the youngest within my generation, and I had the privilege of growing up in an intergenerational home with my grandparents. And in spending a lot of time with them, I think everyone's familiar with the concept of cities being 8 from 80. I had that set up at home as well. So they were my first exposure to the world. Anytime I was really curious about the world, they would tell me about it. They told me about how they grew up. And I was always interested to learn about history from their perspective as I cross-referenced with encyclopedias, because the internet wasn't as big as it is now. So yeah, their willingness to ask or to answer the questions of a child really elicited my curiosity and my interest to learn more about the larger world around me, which would lead me to marry both urban planning and oral history in my practice, and those that I reach, especially within workshops and urban planning grads as well. So I have my grandparents to thank for me being in this practice.
I'm glad to go next. I started as a history major in college. I think I did 1 oral history interview as part of coursework. I hadn't done a lot of it. And a few years later, had the opportunity, a job opportunity, to be part of a team that was going to document the life and career of the late Senator Edmund S. Muskie of Maine. And so I really learned a lot about oral history on the job. I started out doing research, and we got to the point where we were going to start interviewing people. The college, Bates College, wanted to include students in this project and teach them how to do interviews. And so that sort of launched my need to train practice and then develop a really good routine for helping to train students and guiding them. And so that was in the late 90s, and I've been doing oral history ever since.
I'm probably the newest to the field of the panel. Prior to this, I was an academic librarian for my professional career. So, before library school, I did go to a graduate school at the University of Mississippi and was a Southern Studies student there. And so I had a lot of experience conducting interviews there. In fact, towards the end of my time there, the university sponsored a field school for cultural documentation, and Guha Shankar and Michael Taft and David Taylor came, and I participated in that. But I'd been conducting interviews prior to that, but didn't really think of them as oral history interviews. But that's what they were. And even it dates back a little bit to undergrad. But I didn't have big plans for that degree. And like I said, became a librarian. And then a really wonderful opportunity presented itself here at Appalachian State, where I was our first year seminar liaison librarian. And that started an oral history project with our first year students as a way to engage with them and the faculty. And that led to me moving into special collections and doing it full time. And so, again, that was almost 3 years ago. And it's been a really cool pivot into this world. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it when I don't feel like an imposter.
Yes, that's very good. Definitely should not feel that way at all. So our next question is, what learning goals or outcomes do you use oral history to help you accomplish in the classroom setting? And how does oral history help you work on those learning goals with students? Anyone want to jump in? Or if you are working with educators specifically, can you assist them with developing learning goals that can incorporate oral history?
I kind of struggled I came up with some answers to this question, but I think this hopefully gets at what you were interested in. I typically I'm working with different levels of undergrad, but primarily focused on, first and second year students. And so I'm often starting with nothing, sort of introducing like a foundation of what oral history is and how it's different from what they've experienced through their history textbooks. But I try to start with engaging them with their prior knowledge. Many students have conducted interview projects in my experience in high school or even before. And so, but yeah, basic best practices of interviews and crafting, good questions. But I also, coming from a library background, I'm also keen to introduce like how library and archival resources can support their work. So I try to convert those into learning outcomes. And the teaching faculty that I work with, we typically meet before any sessions and we align, our session goals with the goals or outcomes of their courses. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's typically how things work in my experience.
Thank you for that. Did anyone else want to chime in with some of their experience in terms of learning goals and including oral history?
Sure, I can say a few things. In terms of, the goals and the outcomes when I teach at the college level, we talk about experiential learning and beyond the classroom learning. So those two things are pivotal in my class, where we're getting students outside of the classroom, into the communities, interviewing people on whatever topic we've chosen to talk about in the class. And so those are two ways that we try to bring together the students, the community, and the hands-on learning.
Thank you. Thank you. Amber, did you have anything?
What Andrea shared was spot on. It's the same approach when it comes to urban planning. So many students, with all the textbooks and data points, it can be a lot of passive consumption instead of active discovery, understanding that people shape the built environment. So having them go out into the world to talk to people and understand their stories really helps embody the learnings of the world around us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think this is the handoff, right, Destiny? Okay,
Yes.
so it's my turn to ask some questions. Now, there's a little bit of overlap between this question and the previous one, so panelists, feel free to kind of take it in whatever direction you want. How do you introduce students to oral history? What sort of scaffolding is necessary to prepare students to engage with this practice? So either through conducting interviews or reading and analyzing interviews.
I can start. When I teach a class, we start with some readings. We talk about what is oral history, start at the very basic understanding of what oral history is and the ways in which we can use it. It's both a practice of doing oral history and a methodology of conducting research, right? So it's kind of two different things. We do readings. I use Doing Oral History, the third edition by Donald Ritchie, which has provided a lot of support in the classroom to get those basics, the basic understanding. Besides the readings, I always have students look at oral histories that we have online. They write a reflection paper, not a long paper, but a reflection paper after they've looked at the interview that they've chosen, and then they talk about what it felt like to hear about somebody else's life on a particular topic. They usually can pick whatever topic they want from our collections, something that interests them. And then they sort of, I think, start connecting the text reading with what an oral history is. And so we start to formulate that. Then we go into the idea of choosing who we're going to interview based on the topic. And then we begin, usually as a class, I will have everyone together formulate a scaffolding of questions, as was mentioned in the question itself. We get an outline of what the interview will look like broadly for many of the students, and then they work on their specific questions for their individual interview. I may be going off a little too long on that, but that gives you a little bit of the outline.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Very detailed. Any additional thoughts from other panelists in terms of scaffolding for students? Or maybe for non-students even. Yeah, Emma.
Happy to share. So when I have the chance to speak to students, especially urban planning students, I love to ask them, how did you get here? Because urban planning is one of those career paths similar to oral history, that it's all around you, but people don't recognize it's something that people actually do. So usually when I hear students talk about their journey to urban planning, and at times it's their second career, especially in graduate school or so, I ask, what brought you here? How'd you end up in this invisible world of urban planning and transportation planning? And usually a large part of the response is, I was really tired of living in my suburban town. I wanted to see more of the world and influence it. And I'm like, that's wonderful. Tell me more about that town. So, we'll go around sharing where people are from. And sadly, because at times I don't have a chance to see where students go after I have a chance to interact with them, we come up with some questions and I give them not homework, but some field trips to do, just to make the history and make where they live even more tied to the work that they're doing. So with that, again, urban planning as a practice, it can be, how do I say, you influence people's lives. You shape where they live, how they live, in a way that Many of you may be aware of the community meetings that are going on, but often many people don't have a chance to participate in them. So just to really understand the impact of the choices and decisions that these urban planners will be making, I asked them to do a couple things. Because I know they can't do, there's a lot of things going on. So one is ask family. So if they have access to their parents or grandparents about what made them move to this particular area, what were their thoughts and feelings about it? What are landmarks that they would visit? Things of that nature. And second, a visit to their local archives. So that may be their library, their town hall, the state DOT, depending on the infrastructure project that took place. Usually within those spaces, you may not have an exact oral history transcript. There are some particular perceptions of community engagement and how, when people speak to the community, how that gets logged, if at all. But within that, they are able to get access to some primary documents and just see the efforts that community members have made for, or perhaps challenges that they went together to fight against in preserving this place they all call home. So I try to make it more personal for them so they understand the impact of their career as they move forward.
That's great. Thank you.
I don't know that I have a lot to add to that. I think both what Andrea and Amber said are, I do a lot of those similar things. I love active learning as well. I'll just tack that on, and any activities like students, like I think peer share activity to generate question ideas. I've used that quite a bit over the years, and certainly a lot of my types of activities that I work on with classes involve students interviewing one another for those interviews to go into the university archives. So, the beauty of that type of project is I've got, years worth of interviews to share with students so they can get a sense of what students typically, talk about and the types of questions they typically ask one another. So the project is kind of self-sustaining, or that one project that I'm working on anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, having students interview other students, I do the same thing for preparation to send them out in the field, have them do. And I don't like to call it practice because it does count, but it takes some of the nerves off, right? Okay. So next question, and this, I didn't write this question, but I really like it. So whoever on our committee did this question, it's a good one. How does oral history change students' understanding of course content? What are your favorite stories about the power of oral history to change students' thinking? So how does it change the way students think about the past, about the world around them? How is it impactful?
I think asking how it's impactful helps me
Okay, good.
add some comments to this question. Yeah, because I don't know I don't know that I've measured how it changes their thinking, but I can see the impact that it has on them. Um, one of the classes I taught, we used the topic of veterans, and because I'm in South Carolina, it was South Carolina veterans. And so the students each had a veteran to interview. And the stories and the bonds they formed with the people they interviewed was just fantastic. At the end of the semester, as for their final projects, we had like an event, and all the students brought their projects. A lot of them were on the computer, but some of them were big posters. They could choose how to present their final project, and we invited all the veterans that were interviewed. And the students and the veterans all had pictures taken together, and it was just a really great time. You could see the bonds. Two of the veterans were women, and they were quilters, and they made these beautiful quilts for the students that interviewed them. Other veterans invited their interviewee to go out on a boat on Lake Murray or something, so you could see that these friendships and bonds formed over time. And I think, although I didn't measure it, it probably has a pretty big impact on the students going forward.
That's really good. Thank you.
A local topic that I've used to engage students is it's a collection of oral histories I was not involved in, but it was our common reading book a few years ago, and I still cite that. It's a collection of oral histories documenting one of the oldest Black communities in Western North Carolina, and it's right here in Boone. And a lot of students who come to Appalachian State, many of them have grown up coming here over the years with their families on vacation because this is a popular tourist destination, and also makes for a great recruiting tool for college students. But a lot of people don't know about the Junaluska community, which is right here in Boone, and it overlooks downtown Boone. And so I regularly share with them that anthology, incorporate that into my courses, and how that oral history was really instrumental in documenting the history of that community, because there were no written records of that community to speak of. And it was through the power of oral history that now there's that community story is told, and it still exists. It's not as vibrant as it was, probably 70 or 80 years ago, but it's still very much here. And I think that shows, the power of, documenting those unwritten histories, which I do find students are interested in, especially here.
Thank you, Mark.
Those are such amazing examples. There are two in particular, but the one I'll share, especially going to Atlanta for the conference this year, we had an experience once doing a site visit, if you will, in Vine City, in that particular area. This was before the new Mercedes Stadium that's there now. And it was interesting. It was around the time where the second Georgia Dome was about to be, leveled for what we have here now. But some of the students were really shocked to learn there was a previous dome before the dome that was there. And in Vine City, that particular section of Atlanta, it was once a community called Lightning. And just these parallels and layers of history that are just within one block of understanding environmental impacts. And interestingly enough, at that particular time, this pattern of the same struggle that a community faced in a way continues to face in present day. So it just really, I remember just seeing them just saying, like, I didn't realize that. And only until we went into the archives of the city of Atlanta and some of the local universities there, did they see Lightning in print and understand that there were people who were here and called this home, but they never would have known that that community had that name, only if they had access to the archives.
Thank you. And now the handoff, I guess, to Tiffany. So Tiffany's going to pick up where I'm leaving off. Thank you for all those responses.
This next question is about things that didn't quite go right. And so I feel like if we're going to ask our amazing panelists to talk about something that didn't quite stick the landing, I'll share an experience too, just so that we're not putting them on the spot by themselves. The oral history project that we have going at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, as I mentioned in my explanation of who I am, we're connecting it as a teaching material to first-year seminar sections. And after working with alumni's descriptions in their oral histories for a whole semester of what it was like to be a college student on our campus in 1961 or 2018 or 1984, a student wrote in their final course evaluation, I don't understand how spending all this time listening to some old person is relevant to me. And so I thought, oh dear, I have work to do in the next version to better improve students' understanding of sort of like why understanding how prior people's experiences of something that they are also part of. If college studentness is this sort of long-term ongoing historical process that you're joining, that listening to other people could be beneficial to you or maybe help you think about your own historical subjectivity. So that taught me that I had more work to do. So what we wanted to ask you all to share about is about places that in your attempts to work with students in oral history methodology, in analysis of oral history, something that didn't quite work as well as you wanted. So the official question is, can you describe a time when trying to incorporate oral history into a course did not work as well as you hoped it would? What realizations from that experience would you share with fellow teachers and why?
I'm happy to jump in here. And thank you so much for being so gracious to share. So for me, I took on in a volunteer capacity, creating an oral history archive of students who matriculated to Georgia Tech, who are also a part of the wave of students who integrated Georgia Tech. And in this, we taught other students, we wanted to have an intergenerational approach to really get students to understand and connect with our older adults who went through, the same experience of going to Georgia Tech, which is very unique. So in that, though, when we were doing our oral history interviews, we asked a question. It wasn't, I forget the nature of the question, but it was more so about asking about something to undergrad. And in that moment, we had an older adult really have a visceral emotional response. And I think all of us were a bit caught off guard by that. And what I learned in that moment, what we all learned is, I think many of us, especially depending on culture, but definitely related to age, we believed that, people are older, they went through it, this won't elicit any emotions because maybe we're not used to seeing older adults in that way. And it reminded me, just because our generation, or these generations that are here now, are maybe very comfortable with mental health services, therapy, group talk, things like this, with a lot of space and time to process these. A lot of older adults may not have had that experience, and we believe when we were talking to them, we realized this was the first time they really thought about their undergraduate experience, and it had a lot of emotions involved. So from that point on, I became incredibly even more cautious about the emotional depths that we take people to. And in this, we know that there are trauma-informed interviewing methods and procedures, especially when talking about sensitive topics. This was one of the first times where I recognized college and undergrad, not even in a gendered experience, but one just sheerly from the impact of integrating a school in the South and engineering and what that did, and the impacts it continues to have. So from that point on, we became even more delicate. And as a response, though, from that, we created a support group for students, the students who had matriculated during that time, to find each other and speak with one another week after week and restore these friendships and the sense of community. So there's just more infrastructure and support for them as they were talking about the past. And we found that once we created this community for people to be around, it was such a better experience. It was more participation across the board as word of mouth got on about it. So yeah, that was my lesson learned, that we all learned, of just treating older adults, especially those who may seem very accomplished and achieved and all these things, with tremendous care.
Thank you for that. And to me, your answer is such a lovely reminder of how oral history is like an ongoing process, fluid process. Like, we're realizing once we sort of think we have the interviews underway, the interviewees and the interviewers themselves are like responding to us and letting us know that our process has to adjust. So I think that was a really nice illustration of oral history as a sort of ongoing methodological adventure, that when things don't quite go when we're surprised by something, that we have to make adjustments. So that was awesome. What do the rest of you think, panelists?
I can share a story. So the very first time I attempted the project that I've referenced a couple times today that focuses on our first year seminar classes, I'd worked with one faculty member in particular to develop an assignment to basically integrate into his course. And we planned, this was my first semester here at the university. So I wasn't an oral historian here yet. I was still in the capacity of the first year seminar liaison librarian. Um, and we were planning for this in fall 2019 to like roll it out in spring of 20. And as you can imagine, COVID happened. Like I'm sure everyone has a COVID oral history story at this point or multiple ones, but we chatted, and like a lot of people who work in universities, I'm sure students went away at spring break and never came back. And so but I was determined to still do it. And the professor was very supportive of me still doing it. And so we scrambled to find a remote or an online podcasting tool for free that students could easily access and use. And I found one that worked. And then knowing nothing about Adobe Forms, I tried to create release forms that I could like deliver to students electronically to sign and then get back. That was a hot mess. So I learned in my 21st century life, paper forms, I do prefer those over digital forms, mainly because I don't know how to use Adobe Forms evidently very well, but learned a lot from that experience. But at the end of it, I mean, the activity or the assignment still is ongoing. I still work with this professor, and he said really, he was very happy that we persevered that semester. He said, it did create some community in his class when students were just kind of scattered and everybody was in a very odd, disorienting state. If everyone remembers back to that time. So he was very grateful that we were able to persevere and do it because he felt like his students were still able to find some community with each other from a distance. So that was a silver lining for sure. So, but yeah, that was definitely an interesting experience to learn from.
Yes, I can add on to that. COVID time period was quite challenging. I was teaching at the time. The Honors College asked me to double what I was teaching because they needed more online courses. And so I was going into the online environment and having to think about how are we going to do this oral history project in an online environment. And it worked out, but it was a lot of trial and error. What platform were they going to use to interview somebody? And people were just learning, especially, the general public, people they might interview, how do we use Zoom and these sorts of things. So there was a big learning curve there, but we made it. And the students actually chose to do one of the topics during that time was COVID-19. So that's what they wanted to research during COVID. So it was quite interesting, some of what we heard from people. But in terms of challenges faced in the classroom, one of the other stories is I did a course and the topic was skateboarding. And so what I do when I prepare a course ahead of time is to know that I have a good group of names of people that we want to interview. And so I know if I have 10 students in the class, I probably want to have 15 to 20 names. But what I didn't take into account is skateboarders don't answer the phone if they don't want to. They don't answer emails. And so we get to the class, and the students were having a very hard time getting responses from the people we wanted to interview. So that was a challenge. I scrambled, I found people who knew people and got a good list together for the students. But that was one aspect of thinking about infusing oral history into your classroom, is to have that really good list of folks that you want to interview ahead of time.
Thank you all for your answers. Our next question has to do with starting small and thinking about initial steps. And if we think about the answers from the previous question, Amber was making a really important point about inner care and building support networks for interviewees. And Mark was talking about the challenges of informed consent processes and technology. And Andrea was reminding us that there's this complicated process of going from a list of potential names to people who will actually sit for an interview and are willing to work with students who are learning how to interview. And so all of this reminds us that oral history can be labor intensive and it's time consuming work because it's both research methods and care for humans, and it's also teaching people how to do interviews. So there's all of that work. And as teachers, we're always also juggling a lot in our daily work. So we wrote a question where we asked, what suggestions do you have for starting small? What are some initial steps that teachers could take to build an oral history infused curriculum for themselves and their students over time? Who would like to volunteer to tell us something about starting small?
I'll start. I would just think, you know, if I was a teacher and wanted to begin infusing oral history into the classroom, I would think about like what topic do we want to think about, and so that if you wanted to build a collection slowly, right, over years of classes, it could just continue to grow. I do that in my office. You know, talking about the veterans collection, I continue to interview veterans, and that collection grows. I think a teacher in the classroom could do that as well. And depending on the age of the students, right, will depend on how small those steps are, in terms of, you know, are they going to interview a neighbor or a grandparent? They're, you know, in elementary school or high school, or are they in college and they can, you know, you can do something a little bigger, with a little more responsibility. You know, in at the college level, I have the students own the entire interview process. You know, we learn as we go and I guide them, but they do the scheduling of the interview. They make sure they have the correct equipment. They have their questions already. They practiced. Then they do the interview, and then they reflect on the interview. They transcribe the interview, and then they use that interview as the centerpiece for their final project. So you can see how many different steps and how big you can make it or how small.
Yeah, I have a similar experience to that. You know, I think front loading as much as possible is really important. I've learned that in this particular project with first year seminar that I've been doing, and you know, you know, I wouldn't necessarily. The types of interviews that the students are doing with one another is really designed to document their experiences in that first year, that very pivotal first year. And also the other sort of big goal is for students to be able to see themselves in our special collections, because historically students don't often see themselves represented. The myriad perspectives and identities and communities. I'm really interested in creating that environment. But our interviews are typically very short, and I think that does make things a bit more manageable. You know, they're not. Some of them they get really into it and they can talk to each other for hours, but most of them the interviews last maybe 20 to 30 minutes at most. They're shorter, more focused interviews, and I found that makes things easier for students to navigate. But like what Andrea was describing, you know, they have to do all of it themselves, but I do try to set it up in such a way that it does make it a little bit easier for them to navigate, because I know it's in their first year, so they're figuring out how to be college students in that first year. So I often will offer assistance with transcript, generation through an AI tool. You know, we will often have a pool of questions already created that students can choose from. with the option for them to create their own questions. So giving them those sort of assists can help them along the way and make things more manageable for them and for us. So yeah, that's what we try to do.
I would share teachers are truly unsung heroes, like within the people that we end up remembering are those who have an infrastructure of memory to be remembered in the first place. That's from our favorite sports teams, policymakers, celebrities, what have you. But often what I find, and when I speak with people, they remember who their teachers are. And I think that's so special to have. I would offer, knowing just how intensive this work is, it truly is a whole infrastructure that's related to it, and everyone has their part. I think it would be wise for teachers to either interview each other or find a way to ask a poll of students, again, depending on age. Sometimes people love to participate, other times they don't, but I think it would be a really great way to just build, especially within students, the skills of project management, empathy, curiosity, records keeping. No matter what career you end up going into, you need those basic fundamentals. So I think giving students an opportunity to opt in, to even like interview you for, I don't know, 15 minutes, or finding the permutation and combinations of students to do that work, it just builds these lifelong skills that also just connect us to our humanity even more. I think a lot of the work in the world can be so results focused, but oral history is truly, in my opinion, a project where the process is the project and the things that you get from it. So if teachers are able to find these very small ways of just involving oral history between the permutation combination of students or even amongst each other, and finding a way to have that archived in your school, ensuring that like your memory is there outside of, a thumbnail photo within the yearbook that just adds more texture. It is a little time consuming, but in the long run, when someone is looking for you in the future, it'll be there because you put in that work. So I would offer that as just like a tiny piece of advice, or an extra hobby if you don't already have one, to do for the future.
Thank you all for those amazing answers. Destiny, given the time, do we move to question and answer and open it up to the audience now, or what are your thoughts, committee members? Or did we want to ask more of our questions? I guess based on the time, what did you think?
We do have a few questions that were already put into the question and answer. So what I would like to do is ask this one last question, and then we'll move over to the question and answer portion from the audience. And so the last question that we have from our committee would just be I'll narrow it down in the interest of time. What is one resource that you would recommend to someone that is looking to start incorporating oral history into their classroom? Either as a standalone project or even just as a primary source. Was one resource that you would recommend?
I'll just, earlier I said this, but I would love to see it added to the answers for folks. But Doing Oral History by Donald Ritchie, I think the third edition is the most recent one. And specifically chapter 7 is for teaching in the classroom, which might help educators get, their feet wet a little bit. And then a lot of the chapters in there, as I said, I use in the classroom teaching. That's one resource. I also would add that I add some literature that has a connection to oral history in the classroom, and that's the book by Joe Lepore called Joe Gould's Teeth. And it sort of gives you a little mystery. It's an archival adventure, and it also is layered with so many themes that students and I spend at least a full class time discussing the book. And that's a little beyond the instruction of oral history, but I think also important.
I'll share briefly one journal article from the Oral History Review that I absolutely love. It's by Liz H. Strong. It's Shifting Focus. Interviewers share advice on protecting themselves from harm. I think that is a really great piece to read. Alluding back to the last question, figuring out your own self-care when you're taking on so many different people's stories, you're sitting still, you can't fidget, you really are being present with your narrator. So I highly recommend that article to just create your own self-care system and support network for when you're going through to do oral history so you remain whole in the process. So that would be my resource.
I will second the Ritchie book, but I also strive. This isn't a specific resource, but I strive to find examples that are relevant or that sort of get at what I'm trying to get students to do. So now that we've started to collect oral histories, I can refer back to, previous interviews that students have conducted with each other. I try to select ones that I feel like, or with the faculty member, feel like, really illustrate what what we feel like are, good interviews. But I have looked at other, university archives who post for their projects online. And I've directed students to those. So here again, I try to think about what are some schools here in North Carolina, and North Carolina State University down in Raleigh has a really great project called Wolf Tales that I've pointed students to as well, because again, it's students interviewing each other, includes alum of the university. So those are the types of things I've strived to find for this one project in particular.
All right. Thank you for the information and those resources. So now we're going to move over to the question and answer portion. And so if you have not done so already and you have some questions for our panelists, you can put them in the question and answer section that is near the chat. And so the first one, it does not look like a question, but I guess if there are some suggestions for this first one, any of you can chime in. It says, I have no contact with local universities. My challenge is to find a professor that can help me find a class to be engaged in my oral history project. Any tips or suggestions on how to approach this particular challenge? No suggestions? How can we go about finding, I guess, students or a person that has a group of students that they would be willing to help assist?
Oh, would the I guess this is relatively new through the OHA, that directory that just came out within the last couple of years. Would that be a resource for Claude potentially? I don't know how many people use that, but
I would say that would be a good resource for those who are connected with OHA. There is definitely a directory, so you should be able to find educators or professors that might be in your area, or some who are already doing some sort of oral history work with their students that could assist you with the project. It's another comment. I've used oral history assignments in lifespan development courses and combined the oral story with digital pictures to do digital storytelling. And the next one. I am making plans to teach a capstone for college students in the spring, and I want to focus on oral history and archival research. Do you have any experience creating courses like this? Do you have any recommendations for readings or text? And FYI, I'd like to incorporate video recordings, DSLR, etc. Any advice is appreciated. All right, so let's take it one piece at a time. Do any of you have any experience with creating a course like this or teaching a course like this?
I've, oh, go ahead on.
No, go ahead.
I've never taught a semester-long course. I've worked with some faculty who have done capstone courses in one of our residential colleges. So I've supported that type of course. So I would be happy to share. I think there's people will be compiling a reading list to share out with the attendees. So I can talk to this professor and get some of her recommendations and share those once that email goes out. But I don't know if that helps at all. I've got some readings I could share, pass along as well. I don't have them handy, like I can't recite them off the top of my head, but I can get to them easily to share.
Yeah, I think I've kind of answered this question already. But like Mark said, I do have resources I can share out.
Okay, and are those any resources to about incorporating video recordings? I guess the best way to go about doing that or anything like that?
I don't have specific resources that I can think of, but if if I'm not sure if they're asking about video oral histories or something different than that. But there are a lot of examples online.
Mhm.
And I think what I would add, especially if it is with that assumption that they are wanting to do video oral histories, if you have the flexibility to be creative, to reach out to some local departments within your city, or even with organizations within your city or within your particular university, perhaps working with the multimedia department or team, documentary studies would be very helpful. Local filmmakers who know how to utilize that equipment, especially when it comes to the audiovisual setup, could be helpful. There's some universities that have film and TV studies, perhaps finding a way to coordinate with them. So even though all of it seems as if it's the same thing, they're so particular in their practice. So maybe there's some opportunity to do a cross collaboration of just learning how to utilize just the video part. Of course, archiving is a whole other thing.
And I could actually add to that part, as Amber had mentioned, just finding people who are able to or have that specific specialization when trying to do the work. Public libraries and community colleges actually have a lot of spaces that are open to the public that allow you to come in to kind of make those things. So if you're wanting to record in a secure environment where a lot of outside noise isn't interfering, they may have some of those things available. And again, just from my experience, again, I work on the back end of oral history, or what I consider the back end as a transcriptionist. So that audio is very, very important. Of course, it's oral history, but you want to make sure that it is synced correctly. And you don't necessarily want to rely on the audio being captured from that camera. You might need some sort of external resource.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
Yes, it just reminded me, so in at the university here, we do have an area where you can do video interviewing. Also because online interviewing is so much more common now, you can get your video by doing it that way as well. And I always recommend it, if you're going to do a Zoom interview and record it and have the video, just make sure that you have a time where you've met with the person beforehand, before the day of the interview, talk to them on the phone and have somewhat of a rapport before you go, you don't want to go into the interview cold online. Yes.
All right. So the next question we have is, could we get a list of the resources that were referenced today? Which I think that could be arranged. What advice would you give a candidate on the academic job market in terms of marketing their work with oral history to a general audience? I don't have any advice in that area.
Yeah, the first thing I can think of is just the sort of skills that the listening skills and interviewing skills would both academic job market. I don't know. I know a lot of us have master's degrees in library science or history background, but you can come really from any discipline working with oral history. So those are just a couple thoughts I had.
Yeah, I'm not an academic, especially within this group. I'm very out in the world of consulting and some nonprofit organizations. But I would say, in terms of trying to reach a general audience, I believe academics and those who are in this space understand what oral history is. Everyone outside of this, they call it very different things. And it's frustrating, I know, for me, because I want to just be an oral historian, but sharing that I'm a biographer, memoir writer, storyteller, cultural steward, there are these different terms that just help people understand the importance of what we do. And because it is so deeply human, it almost escapes language. So I would just try to find a way to show those the importance of it, maybe trying different ways to describe what you do. If you're going outside of academia, again, I'm sorry, I can't help you in that particular place, but there's so many connections with what oral history can do, especially related to connecting with people, markets, continuity of a brand, continuity to founder roots. So finding those elements of just tapping into these like core truths and values that people have, and just finding some more maybe visual or creating actual products to show potential clients or corporations could be one way to enter the job market competitively while showing the deep value of the skills that you have.
Yeah, and I think someone mentioned project management. I mean, I think there's a big element of project management to what we do. And I think, being able to crosswalk any of the skills that you gain in this type of work into other environments is critical. So I don't have a lot to add, but I do empathize with you. Speaking from a library background, I mean, this is a really novel way to do collection development work. I'm finding it beats going to order books from a catalog. I get to interview and generate sources that way to add to the collection. And I think, anyway, with librarians that would resonate. But that's about as niche as it gets. So maybe not super helpful.
If I
Thank
could,
you all. Oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was just gonna say, this might seem like a wacky suggestion, but bear with me. So if I'm trying to think about based on the wording of the question, so if the question asker is at a university right now and or trying to market themselves to a university. Here at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, our career development part of our university has vocabulary that they've created. They call it Eagle Advantage, but it's like the 8 skills that consumer or that employers want from our graduating college students. And as professors, one of the things we've done is hack that language to point out that we teach students those skills and then translate those sets of skills that they're saying employers want. Like, how do we do that in the classroom? So I wonder if you're in an equivalent situation where there's sort of like a pre-made like skill set branding that your university has, which ones of those skill sets are taught through the process of doing oral history. So we think a lot about the multiple kinds of communication and project management, like Amber and Mark were saying. I love, by the way, Amber's point about record keeping too, that sort of this helps you think about all the paperwork and all the electronic files and how everything gets held together. And so I think the one at UWL is like digital literacy or something like that. But I wonder if there is an equivalent sort of set of vocabulary that your university has that talks about like what employers want and where are you in your relationship to those students that you would want to be teaching or that you do teach or that you've had experience with as a graduate student that like could be your version of that kind of narrative, and how does that relate to oral history? So maybe I hope that helped.
Yes, that was a great suggestion, great information. The next question that we have is, what are best practices? And there's another similar question too. What are best practices to prepare students to ask and hear about sensitive or emotional content? And there's a similar one that spoke to specific sources on trauma-informed interviewing. So try to kind of combine those 2 questions. So preparing students for sensitive or emotional information.
I can talk a little bit about what we do in the classroom. And so I talk about that this can happen during the interview, like I use sometimes the veterans interviews to give examples of that. I also play clips from interviews where there's a big pause in the recording. The person is trying to gather themselves. They may have cried a little bit. And I let the students just sit there through that and feel it, and then we talk about it. And I do that before they go out to do their interviews so we can process it in the classroom, and they're not going to be hit with it without knowing when they go into the interview.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I'll share something that's a bit, I can't call it a best practice just yet, but a resource perhaps that may be helpful. There is, depending on your student, depending on where they may live online, on TikTok and Instagram, there's one particular person I found recently that I find very interesting because they do a lot of body language reading. They take shows from, you may all have heard of Love Island and other things like that that happen in contemporary news, and they break it down. The practitioner, her name is Cece Rice, but she goes and shows where people are, how they're processing their emotions through their body, which I thought was so interesting. And I've started to watch her particular TikToks and Instagram reels because I find it so interesting to see how it shows up in the body in real time in an entertaining form of content. So I recommend finding people like her online just to see those like connections in pop culture, but how they really can and do show up while interviewing someone across. And another one, this is from a journalist. Her name is Alice Wilder. She created a interview guide for trauma-informed interviewing for reporting. I know interviewing as a journalist and an oral historian can be different at times, but I think there are some particular overlap that she outlines within the interview guide that are really good to just keep in mind. And I think lastly, I would say practicing, even like by yourself, watching videos like Andrea had shared, I think is really smart. It just constantly reminds me that oral history is a practice. It's not just one solution you get right all the time, but just getting really familiar with your body and responding and paying attention to other people's bodies and responses while interviewing just helps you have better reflexes for how to process in real time.
And I think Voice of Witness also has some resources on this as well. Might be a place to look.
And that was Voice of Witness? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we have another question. There's a strong emphasis on work-based learning at my university and an increasing expectation that course content align very specifically with skills that students will need in the workplace. If you were arguing the importance of oral history work as building work-based competencies, what are the specific skills that you would highlight?
We touched on some of these in a previous question, but yeah, I mean, project management, active listening, those are a couple of ones that spring to mind. Good record keeping.
Some universities now are also doing versions of problem solving and critical thinking as like job skills that they claim they're teaching. And I think there are real world examples and sort of both for critical thinking and the analysis of oral history as a primary source. One of the biggest challenges in working with students, particularly younger college students, is that they come into college with or high school even too, with an assumption that the way that people will talk about their own historical experiences is going to match like a textbook narrative that they're used to. And then they listen to someone who explains their own world and what they remember and what happened to them in a way that's authentic to them and doesn't always have the dates exactly right, but is authentic and true to how they remember things. And so the critical thinking and what do you do when sources don't line up or when people don't agree with each other, or even just in terms of problem solving and what happens if you forget the charger cord, if you forget the extra batteries, if you don't have your release form, how is that process going to work? And if students are in a course, if they're thinking about oral history as like a collaborative enterprise that they and other students are part of, then sometimes you can also make the argument about teamwork and contributing to something that's larger than yourself. And then it sort of also goes into holding yourself and other people accountable. At UWL, there's a big push on accountability as a marketable skill and how do you prove that you're accountable to other people. And so in the oral history courses that I teach, we sort of use the project we're on is something that everyone's accountable to someone else. Someone's doing the research and then they have to inform the person who's doing the questions, writing the first draft of the question set or something like that. So I hope those examples help, but I think anchoring it in the sort of language of the university and then thinking about what are the moments, the instances, the learning challenges that students are finding themselves in is like where that really happens. Mapping it out that way has been how we've sort of handled that at UWL.
All right. Thank you for that information as well. In the interest of time, I would say probably only have time for one or two more questions. And so we're looking at working at a university here where we are lucky to have multiple oral history practitioners teaching. However, some of the practitioners have different ideas about best practices, the responsibility of the interviewer, etc. What are your thoughts about teaching oral history collaboratively in a department when different folks have different ideas about how the process should go?
My first idea is to, have them read the best practices um, guidelines that we've developed here at OHA, because I think if folks in a department can agree to use that as their guiding document, it will serve them well in being consistent in their teaching and practice of oral history.
Anyone else have any suggestions about that?
If you can get your colleagues to have a discussion about this, a way to think about it might be what to ask, what would you want students to do in a certain situation? If there are like fault lines where people aren't agreeing on best practices, like maybe turning one or two of those examples into a question that people could listen to each other kind of react to might give you a way to build consensus. So for example, in our department, there are multiple oral history projects going on at the same time, and one faculty member thought that it would be okay to just sort of let students do a project and then inform the oral history program after the fact that they had done the project, like working on the assumption that the materials would just get donated to us. And that it wasn't in fact the way that we wanted to do it. And so we were able to have a conversation and say, like, here's how this could work better if we sort of collaborated together and if we knew that things were going to happen in this way. So maybe there are some like scenarios you could extract from previous experience and have folks sort of say, what if students do this? How would you want them to react?
That is a good suggestion. Does anyone else have any input on that before we go to the next one? There's more questions about planning resources that detail practical exercises regarding interview techniques. So again, it's another call for resources, as well as recording platforms. Could some of you speak to what kind of platforms you may use, or for recording or any interview techniques?
I can just say that if I'm doing an interview long distance, we'll use Zoom or Teams. And then in person, just a handheld recorder, recording in WAV. You want to, whenever you can, record in WAV. The Zoom platforms do not record in WAV. MP4, somebody correct me if I have that wrong. I'm thinking of that off the top of my head. But if you're using a recorder, and a lot of phones these days are getting much better and better, and they can sometimes record in WAV as well.
I am on the less technical side, more presence. I would say practicing. Again, I emphasize oral history as a practice. I think with a lot of disciplines, you get your degree or you get the job and it's like, okay, this is just what I do now. And I don't study again. I don't try it again. I just, do the job that's in front of me. I think it's really great to just practice with those you're comfortable with. Maybe it can be very low stakes if it's a family member that you're familiar with. Those are just really great ways to practice using the equipment, like Andrea had said. And within just the actual interview, learning things about how to hold your face, maybe squeezing your thumb, like ways to just regulate yourself as you're listening to a lot of different content. all these like subtle movements can have impact on your narrator, but also they really do show up within yourself as well. So just trying to find as many opportunities to practice, noticing your intonation, how you ask questions, all these little things. I think just practicing to the point you feel very comfortable and asking questions can feel natural without the need to blurt out something, or again, impulse control, I think is a really big one related to just like you're moving your body or wanting to interject if you're not as comfortable or familiar, or, you know, you may want to retain a thought or things like that. So just like these very practical things of noting how long you can hold a question that you want to ask while a narrator's going along a few different paths in your discussion, I think are really great ways to build your acuity.
And I know we were out of time, but I'll just quickly add, again, I think the Voice of Witness organization has a lot of teaching resources in addition to OHA, but also in terms of online platforms. I've heard really good things about Riverside as a podcasting tool. I've never used it. I have experimented with CleanFeed as another remote like podcasting tool, beyond just the handheld recorders. But those are two that I have used CleanFeed a little bit, but Riverside I'm not, but I've heard really good things about it.
All right. So we are at time. So with that, there was one question. I'm sorry, we did not get to that one. And so just in closing, again, we'd like to thank each of our panelists for being here today, this afternoon, and sharing all of the information with everyone. I would also like to thank the Public Programs Committee as well as our committee liaison, as well as Stephen and Leslie with OHA, as well as Autumn Brown, and all of you for attending today. I believe that the recording will be posted on the OHA website. I forget the tab off the top of my head, but there is a drop-down tab on the website where you can access some of the previous recordings. So it should be there. I'm not sure the turnaround time on that, though. But I do, again, appreciate each of you all for being here today. Ask that you keep in mind, again, the annual meeting where our committee will be present. Some presenters will be present, and again, the educators' professional development. All right. And so with that, I will allow you all to enjoy the remainder of your day, and thank you again for attending.
Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I appreciate you guys.